And now picking up right where we left off. And I'm going to make sure that I'm in the Hungry data directory where hungry_data.py is. And let's go ahead and run Python 3 hungry_data.py. And we get a little error. Field names is not defined. So we look at line 33 in hungry_data.py. Let's jump back in. And we got line 33, field names. Okay, so it file names and field names. Little mistake there. But anyway, so now that we've got this, let's save it and we'll try it again. hungry_data.py. We press enter and it comes out. So if you had any issues with this, if something raises, if there's an error that happens, you might need to get rid of that right header for a second and see what's going on here, because this is not exactly perfect because of our data.csv file. So the input data might not work perfectly. And if it's not working perfectly, then all you need to do is erase all this stuff and you'll go ahead and add your own header how you see fit. But right now, this should work just fine as is. And then what we saw happened was all of the different rows printing out, right? So that's the data actually coming through. And that's how we can actually see that we can set this data. Notice amount and cent are not in here currently. They will be very soon. So what we did here also was we created a temporary file. So what we can do is actually print out that file. So let's go ahead and print temp file.name. I save it, run this stuff again, and I see here is the actual file. So if I copy this, Windows users is going to be a little different for you, but if I did open, type that out, it will actually open up that temporary file for me. Notice it has all of that original data in here. So if I look at the original and the new stuff, it has the original data plus that amount and some empty extra column at the end. So that is what we now need to do, is move that from the temporary location to the current file. To do that, very simple, actually wrote it out, and that's shutil move that temporary file into the file name, and that's the last thing that we actually need to do outside of that for loop. So I'm going to put that right there. And now this should override everything and actually change our rows. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this, and I'm going to change delete to true now. This is going to be up to you on whether or not you want to actually delete that temporary file, but I'm going to go ahead and put it as true, save it, and we're going to try it one more time. I'm going to go ahead and run it. Let's close out that extra terminal window, run it, and we get no such file or directory. So we actually probably need to leave it deleted as false. Could probably delete it after, which is something we'll do. And if I run it now, it actually runs and it shows all that data. We go back into data, and now it's showing all of those things as we see fit. So I can also import something like time zone. So let's go ahead and import date time. And I'm going to add another one and just say date or date checked or whatever. Doesn't really matter, exactly that. And we could just do date equals to datetime.datetime.now. And that should give us a date object in there. Let's run that. And if we look back into our data, we now see a date timestamp in there and showing us date. And notice sent is all empty in here, which is important to know. But it is empty, and that is something that we will want to adjust. Now that we were able to copy the original and adjust the data, we want to change it in a different way. Actually, what I want to do is change it based off of, let's say, an ID. So I'm going to come in this row or this for loop here, and I'll say if row ID is equal to, let's say, 4, then let's write this stuff out, and I'll say sent equals to true. Let's tab this back. So this now is assuming that we're making some changes. This hopefully is exciting to you because that means that we can wrap all of this stuff in a function very, very soon, but not quite yet. So I'm going to try it like this because intuitively this is what I would do. I would go row ID, so I'm going to assume the ID is an integer because IDs normally are integers, especially with the database. So let's go ahead and assume that. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to run it. I don't know if anything happened. So let's look at our data.csv. Uh-oh, everything's gone. So the first thing that I want to emphasize here is that I didn't actually write any of the rows into my temporary file. So therefore, when I copied everything over, it copied nothing. So now it's actually 100% empty. So we need to update our stuff here. And what I want to do now is understand this part right here. So with this data transaction, I'm actually going to say data or just new data or just original data, OG data equals to, and I'm going to make it equal to all of this. So I'm going to cut this out, paste this in here. So this is the original data, and it's coming off of what's inside of that row. So I'll put amount. And in this case, all of this stuff would be there if it is the original data. So of course, I don't actually have to write out OG data because the row is already a dictionary, right? So I don't actually need to do that. But what I need to do is come in here and change the row as I see fit. So I'm going to bring back this row, writer row, and put row in here. I'll explain what I'm doing here in just a second. But if row ID equals to that, we are now going to say the row sent is equal to true. So the string of true, or we could do the actual just true. Notice it's writing the row, so when we printed out the row or when we saw the print, we saw that we actually can see what that row specifically is. So let's just go ahead and print out that row so we can see exactly what's going on with that particular ID. But before I can actually run this, I'm going to go ahead and comment all of that out. I need to add some new data in. So let's go ahead and update our append data now with the new field names as such, and the new right row being amount and amount. So we want to add amount here and sent here, and then we will actually leave out date to being the date time of now. And then we'll do amount is, check that spelling error, amount, and finally date is datetime dot now. Get rid of this extra amount here. So that should cover everything, right? So amount, and we actually don't have sent, so I'll leave sent as empty. So we definitely want to have sent empty because it is empty. Notice that I don't actually have these in order. I mean, better practice would be to have them in the same order as the field names, but how the dictionary values and stuff work, they don't have to be. Okay, cool. So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and append our data. And I want to make sure that I put an amount in here, and I'll just say some random number, and then I'm going to leave out sent. I'm actually also going to leave out sent from an argument. So really all I added was the amount. So now that I saved that, and let's run it again. I'm going to run it a few times. Look into our data. We now have some data in here. So I'm going to run it a few more times just so we have some more data. And we do. So I'm going to get rid of that append data now. And let's go back into our new one of writing things. So this now should work. And what we're doing in here with this row is we're saying if the row ID is equal to 4, then we're going to update the value in sent to true. We're going to then, after we update that specific value, then we're going to change the row or whatever is going on there. So let's go ahead and save it, and let's run it again. Let's look into our data, and we see here that, well, doesn't look like anything happened. And let's see why. Going back into hungry data, it's probably something with this conditional. Now, I know this because of intuition. I've used it so many times that I have an idea that it's this conditional that's failing because the row sent is not working. So there's something wrong here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and just print the conditional out. Save it, go back in, run it again, and I see false, 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 false. Well, somewhere in there, the ID is equal to 4. Let's look at that data again. Maybe it's not treating integers as Python integers. That might be a possibility. So let's go ahead and just make it an integer or assume that the ID would be an integer. And now we're comparing an integer to an integer. This should actually work fine. So let's go ahead and run it this time. I run it, and it actually prints out that new row, and it shows that sent is true. I look into my data. There it is. Sent is now true. So I now have a way to edit data as I see fit. Very cool, very useful. Now let's go ahead and make a function from all this stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and define edit data, and I'll just say ID and sent. This is all I'm going to do right now because this is related to this. And I'm going to go ahead and tab this in. Edit data ID is going to now be the integer again of ID. Let's just make sure that's an integer. And we'll put sent in here as well. You know what? Let's go ahead and add amount also. And I'll put in here of row and amount equals to amount. And after all that's done, we're going to return true. Otherwise, we'll return false, meaning it doesn't finish. Some error happens. We'll return false. And then finally, we are going to call this edit data of the ID of, let's say, 8. And I'll give it an amount of 1, or let's say 9999, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't really matter. Sent equals to, well, let's just put an empty string in there. I'm going to go ahead and run this. We'll save it as is, run it. Looks like it did change. Let's go back into our data. And what do you know? Let's see. We said ID of 8. We have our data being changed. Sent is no longer in there. Of course, if we looked at this in a little bit better of a format, meaning inside of our numbers program on our Mac, or if you're on Windows, you can open up Excel. It now shows it a little bit better for us, right? So we have our date looking a little nicer and all this stuff. Of course, we can format all of these things how we want, but now it's actually showing these as we see fit, and it's even giving us some color and stuff like that too. So that is editing our data. Now, I do want to point out that this if statement right here can do all sorts of things. Like you could also do it based off email, right? That would be another way to do this. So let's actually update our edit data method accordingly. So this is now going to be keyword arguments instead of just what we have here. So I'll say ID is equal to none, amount is equal to none, sent is equal to none, and we'll say email is equal to none. So now what I'll do is if ID, so we'll just say edit ID instead of just ID, so just so it's not confused as far as syntax editing is going. If ID, all I have to do here is tab this in, and then we'll put the integer of ID here. So amount and sent are the things that we're really looking about changing. And then we'll say if email, doing the exact same thing. So if email, then we want to do that same if statement. Now it's going to be, instead of integer, we'll just say if row of email. We might want to just make sure it's a string for both of these things. We'll just do str on those two. And now you've got that same clause. So now I can run it as email or edit ID. And we'll say is not none and is not none and edit ID is none. Or simply elif here. Okay, and otherwise we will just pass. So now in our edit ID call, we can now say edit data, and we'll say email equals to. Now this is going to have to be some sort of email in here, and in this case we're going to say hello@cfe.com, and then we will say the amount equals to $99.99 and sent equals to an empty string. Of course we can write more conditionals for all that other stuff, but I'm going to leave it like this. Save it. Let's see if this works. Go ahead and run it. Look in our data, and everything changed. Very cool, very useful, very straightforward, hopefully. And now we have this method to actually edit our data based off of an ID or some other thing. Cool. So if you guys have any questions on this, let us know. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow.